All right, let's move into passive transport. Passive transport is when the ions, water, whatever is moving into or out of the cell, move without the use of energy. It's passive. It's going to happen regardless of whether or not there's an energy force. There are several different types of passive movement or passive transport, so we're going to talk about some of them. First of all, let's talk about filtration. Filtration is going to occur when there are what we refer to as pores or openings between cells. Filtration refers to the movement of particles through those pores and or through a selectively permeable membrane, aka the plasma membrane, by the use of hydrostatic pressure. What is hydrostatic pressure? Hydrostatic pressure is the force exerted on a membrane by water. So think of a hose. Think of your faucet. The pressure of the water coming out of that hose, out of that faucet, that is hydrostatic pressure. So this hydrostatic pressure is going to be everywhere in the body, wherever there is fluid. And specifically, we see filtration in two main places: capillaries, wherever there's capillaries, and the kidneys, specifically in the nephrons. We'll talk about that later. So in capillaries, blood pressure is going to force, so the pressure of the fluid or water is going to force water, salts, nutrients, solutes, basically whatever can fit through this permeable membrane and or pores through the membrane and pores and out of the capillaries. That being said, only things that can fit through will be forced out. So things like red blood cells, white blood cells, blood proteins, those are going to remain. This same thing is going to be used in the nephron or the functional unit of the kidney in order to remove waste from blood and then put some things back into the blood. This is an image of the glomerular or glomerulus, I should say. It's also referred to as the glomerular capsule if we're talking about this entire thing as a unit. This is a glomerulus or a bundle of capillaries. This is where we would have some filtration going on in the nephron. All right, so before we get too in-depth here with passive transport, we do need to also mention active transport. Active transport is when we're going to have the active movement of particles through the use of energy. Another big difference between passive and active transport is passive transport moves through what we call a gradient. So things are going to move from a high concentration down to a low concentration, whereas active transport can move, this is against the gradient, but can actually move in any direction. A lot of active transport mechanisms are going to move molecules from low to high concentration, but they can also speed up the movement of molecules from high to low. So they can be used in any capacity. All right, so the most common passive transport mechanism is what's referred to as simple diffusion. Simple diffusion is, well, the best example I have is a tea bag. You stick a tea bag in a cup of hot water, and the water right around the tea bag is a nice, dark, concentrated color. That's a high concentration of the tea molecules. Everything else is a low concentration. Given time, that color or that concentration is going to even out throughout the entire cup of water. That is diffusion. Molecules are going to move from a high concentration to a low concentration, trying to even it out until it's balanced on both sides of the membrane, if at all possible. And it will do so without the use of energy. This particular slide is showing that same thing, only instead of using a tea bag, it's using green dye. Now, there is also something known as facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion is going to utilize a carrier protein that spans both sides of the membrane. And with a facilitated diffusion, we're going to have whatever it is, whatever solute it may be, sodium, potassium, calcium, whatever it is, bind to the carrier. The act of binding is going to change the shape, and the changing of the shape will allow the solute to move through the membrane. Again, though, this does not require any energy. There's also something referred to as osmosis. We're going to talk about osmosis in a lot more detail later, about slide 71. Osmosis is the movement of water from a high ion or solute concentration to a low solute concentration. Basically, water is going to try and balance out the solute concentration. So instead of the solute moving, it's the water that's moving. Water, however, typically can only get into and out of a cell by the use of what are referred to as aquaporins. Aquaporins are special pores within the plasma membrane that allow for the easy movement of water into and out of the cell. Now, when we talk about osmosis, we also need to talk about something known as hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure is the amount of pressure required to stop. We need to talk about something known as osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure is the amount of hydrostatic pressure required to stop osmosis. I flipped my terms back around. Sorry about that. So, osmotic pressure is the amount of force that exerted by water that is needed in order to stop osmosis. And that does not necessarily mean that the concentrations have leveled out.